I should have known the night would end badly the moment he walked through the door. It wasn't just that he commanded attention, plenty of men tried that in this city, with their expensive suits and rehearsed confidence. No, this was different. This man didn't try. He simply was. The air shifted around him, thick and electric, like the seconds before lightning splits the sky. I was wiping down table 7 when the noise in Russo's bistro died to a murmur. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Silverware stopped clinking. Even Marco, our head chef who feared nothing and no one, went silent in the kitchen doorway. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back in a way that suggested both precision and carelessness. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind that whispered wealth without shouting it. But it was his face that made my hands still on the damp cloth. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single sweep, and a mouth set, in a line that suggested he'd forgotten how to smile years ago. Or maybe he'd never learned. 3 men flanked him, all wearing similar dark suits, all radiating the same controlled danger, but none of them mattered. He was the sun, and they were merely satellites trapped in his gravitational pull. Lucia. My manager's voice cracked slightly. Antonio, who once threw out a local councilman for being rude to the staff, was wringing his hands like a nervous child. Table 1. Now. Table 1. The corner booth with the best view of the street, the one we kept reserved for VIPs who never actually came, until tonight. My heart kicked against my ribs, but I smoothed my apron and crossed the restaurant floor with what I hoped looked like confidence. Years of waitressing had taught me to mask everything: exhaustion, frustration, fear. I could do this. I approached the table where he'd settled into the booth like a king claiming a throne. His men stood at attention nearby, their eyes scanning the restaurant with mechanical precision. "Good evening," I said, proud that my voice came out steady. "Can I start you with something to drink?" He didn't look at me immediately. Instead, he studied the wine list with an expression that suggested he found it vaguely insulting. When his eyes finally lifted to meet mine, I forgot how to breathe. They were dark, almost black, but with flecks of amber that caught the candlelight. Intelligent, calculating, dangerous, and fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously exposed and invisible. "Your best bottle of Barolo," he said. His voice was low, textured like smoke and velvet, an accent threaded through it Italian, but refined, educated, old money or old power. Maybe both. "Of course," I scribbled on my pad, grateful for something to do with my hands. "And for dinner? We'll decide." It wasn't a dismissal exactly, but it felt like one. He returned his attention to the menu, and I should have walked away. I should have. But then one of his men, a shorter man, with cold blue eyes and a scar running down his left cheek, leaned in and muttered something in rapid Italian. Something about logistics and shipments and timing. The man at the center, the one who'd stolen all the oxygen from the room, responded in what I immediately recognized as Russian. Fluid, commanding, absolute. The scarred man blinked, then tried again in what sounded like Greek. Without missing a beat, the dark-eyed man replied in Greek, his tone dropping to something that made the other man's face go pale. My hand moved before my brain caught up. I set down my pad and said, in perfect Greek, perhaps he'd understand better if you spoke slower. Fear makes comprehension difficult. The silence that fell was different from before. This one had weight, gravity, consequence. All 4 men turned to stare at me. The scarred man's face flushed with rage or embarrassment, I couldn't tell which. The other 2 guards exchanged glances that promised violence. But him. The man in the center tilted his head slightly, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or amusement. Or something far more dangerous. "You speak Greek," he said. It wasn't a question. Among other things. I don't know what possessed me to add that. Maybe exhaustion from pulling double shifts. Maybe the recklessness that sometimes seized me when I was tired of being invisible. His eyes narrowed. "How many languages?" "Enough. Demonstrate." It was a command, not a request. Every instinct screamed at me to apologize, to back away, to remember my place. But there was something in his gaze, a challenge. Yes, but also genuine curiosity, as if he'd discovered something unexpected and hadn't decided yet whether to keep it or crush it. I switched to Italian. "Your Barolo will be out in a moment. Shall I give you time to decide on dinner, or would you prefer recommendations?" Russian, he said. I complied, repeating the same sentence with flawless pronunciation. French. Again. Mandarin. I hesitated for only a heartbeat before delivering it perfectly. Something changed in his expression. The hardness softened at the edges, revealing something almost human underneath. Almost impressive. He leaned back against the leather booth, and for the first time, his mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. What's your name? Lucia. Lucia. He repeated it slowly, as if tasting each syllable. Do you know who I am? No. It was a lie. By now, the pieces had assembled themselves in my mind. The deference from Antonio, the guards, the multiple languages, the way everyone in the restaurant had stopped breathing. I didn't know his name, but I knew what he was. Power, danger, death in an expensive suit. Good, he said softly. Keep it that way. He dismissed me with a slight gesture, and I walked back to the bar on legs that had forgotten how to be steady. My hands trembled as I poured the Barolo, and I could feel his gaze on me the entire time, heavy, assessing, burning into my spine. When I returned with the wine, he was speaking quietly into his phone in yet another language I couldn't place. He ended the call as I approached. Leave the bottle, he said. I did. As I turned to go, his hand shot out and caught my wrist. Not hard, but firm, inescapable. I froze. He looked up at me, those dark eyes pinning me in place. You're wasted here, Lucia. Then he released me and returned to his conversation as if nothing had happened. I made it back to the kitchen before my knees gave out. Antonio found me leaning against the prep counter, trying to remember how to breathe normally. Are you insane? He hissed. Do you have any idea who that is? No, I whispered. Who? Antonio's face went gray. Dante Volkov. The Volkov family. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Lucia, listen to me very carefully. Whatever happens tonight, you smile, you serve, and you forget everything you heard. Understand? But I couldn't forget. Not the way Dante Volkov had looked at me. Not the feeling that my ordinary life had just ended. And especially not the black car that was idling outside the restaurant when my shift ended 3 hours later, or the man in the dark suit who stepped out of the shadows and said, Mr. Volkov requests your presence. Now. The rain had started during my last hour at the bistro, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and shadow. I stood on the curb with my jacket pulled tight, staring at the black Mercedes that looked like it had been carved from midnight itself. The man who'd delivered Dante Volkov's summons stood beside the rear door, his face impassive. He was younger than the others I'd seen earlier, maybe 30, with sharp features and eyes that tracked every movement on the street. I don't think so, I said, trying to sound firm. Tell Mr. Volkov I appreciate the offer, but I'm going home. It wasn't an offer. 4 words, spoken without malice, without emotion. Just fact. My stomach twisted. What happens if I refuse? The man's expression didn't change. You don't want to find out. Behind me, Antonio appeared in the bistro's doorway. Our eyes met, and I saw the answer written across his face. Go. Do whatever they want. Survive. My phone was in my pocket. I could call the police. But even as the thought formed, I knew how absurd it was. Men like Dante Volkov didn't fear the police. They owned them or intimidated them or made them disappear. Where are we going? I asked. Somewhere private. The man opened the door. Please. The addition of that single word, please, somehow made everything worse. It suggested civility, manners, a veneer of choice over something that had none. I climbed into the car. The interior smelled of leather and something else, cologne maybe, or just money. The seats were butter soft. The windows tinted so dark that the city outside became a blur of light and motion. The man who'd summoned me sat in the front passenger seat. Another driver I hadn't noticed before was behind the wheel. We pulled away from the curb, and I watched Russo's bistro shrink in the rear window until it disappeared entirely. No one spoke. I counted the turns we made, trying to memorize the route. Left, right, straight for 6 blocks, another left. But after 10 minutes, I lost track. The city became unfamiliar, the streets narrower, the buildings older and more imposing. We stopped in front of a warehouse that looked abandoned, broken windows, graffiti-scarred walls, weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement. But when the driver tapped a button on the dash, A garage door rolled open to reveal pristine concrete floors and recessed lighting that turned everything cold and clinical. "Out," the younger man said. My legs had gone numb during the drive. I stumbled getting out of the car, and he caught my elbow with surprising gentleness. "This way." He led me through a steel door, down a hallway that smelled of fresh paint, and into an elevator that descended for what felt like forever. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that didn't belong in an abandoned warehouse. The room was massive, at least 3,000 square feet, with exposed brick walls, vaulted ceilings, and furniture that looked like it had been lifted from a European palace. Persian rugs covered polished concrete floors. Original artwork hung on the walls. A bar stretched along one side, bottles of liquor arranged like soldiers at attention. And in the center of it all, sitting in a leather chair with a glass of amber liquid in his hand, was Dante Volkov. He'd removed his jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with scars and what looked like the edge of a tattoo. He looked less polished than he had at the restaurant, more dangerous, like a blade that had been unsheathed. "Lucia." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." I remained standing. "Why am I here?" "Because I asked you to be." "That's not an answer." Something flickered in his eyes, approval. Maybe. "No, it's not." He took a slow sip of his drink, watching me over the rim of the glass. "You speak 7 languages fluently. 8 if we count the Mandarin you tried to hide. You work at a mediocre bistro for minimum wage plus tips. You have a degree in linguistics from Columbia University, but never pursued it professionally. You live alone in a studio apartment in Queens. Your rent is 3 weeks overdue." The blood drained from my face. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know things." He set down his glass with a soft click. "Especially when something interests me. I'm not interested in being your thing." "Good. I don't collect things. I collect assets." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the intensity of his gaze made my pulse stutter. "You have a skill. I need. I'm prepared to pay you extremely well for it." "What kind of skill?" "Translation. Interpretation. Both verbal and written." He gestured vaguely at the air. "I conduct business with people from many countries. I need someone who can move between languages seamlessly, who can catch nuance and subtext, who won't flinch when conversations become difficult." "Difficult," I repeated. "You mean violent?" "Sometimes." At least he was honest. "And if I refuse?" Dante stood, and the room suddenly felt smaller. He crossed the space between us with 3 measured steps, stopping close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar, and smoke, and something darker. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "You won't refuse," he said softly. "Why not?" "Because you're drowning, Lucia. Because that apartment you can't afford, that degree you can't use, that life you're living in black and white, I'm offering you color. Danger, yes, but also purpose. Money, protection." His hand came up, and I flinched, but he only tucked a strand of wet hair behind my ear. "And because some part of you, the part that spoke Greek when you should have stayed silent, wants to say yes." My breath caught. He was right, and I hated him for it. I hated him for seeing through me, for knowing that my safe, predictable life felt like slow suffocation, for understanding that some reckless part of me had been waiting for something, anything, to shatter the monotony. "One job," I heard myself say. "I'll do one job, then we're done." Dante smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen from him, and it was terrifying in its beauty. "We'll see," he said. Then he handed me a folder marked with Cyrillic letters I couldn't quite make out in the dim light, and I realized I'd just made a deal with the devil. The folder contained documents that would have sent most people running. Shipping manifests, financial records, contracts written in 6 different languages with clauses that danced around words like acquisition and liquidation and territorial agreements. Nothing explicitly illegal, but everything steeped in the kind of menace that lived between the lines. I sat at a table in the corner of Dante's underground fortress, because that's what it was, really, and translated until my eyes burned and my hands cramped. He'd given me a laptop, a notepad, and instructions to be thorough. "Miss nothing," he'd said before disappearing through a door marked private. "Lives depend on accuracy." That was 6 hours ago. Now it was past 3 in the morning, and I'd worked my way through most of the Russian and Italian documents. The Mandarin contracts were next, dense with technical language about shipping routes and delivery schedules that seemed innocent, until you noticed the dates coincided with reported cargo thefts along the eastern seaboard. I was cross-referencing a particularly suspicious clause when Dante returned. He moved silently for such. A large man, appearing at my shoulder without warning. I jumped, nearly knocking over my cold coffee. "Progress?" he asked. Slow. Whoever wrote these knew exactly how to obscure meaning. I pointed to a line in Russian. "This says transfer of organic materials, but the weight classifications don't match any agricultural or medical supplies." And here, I switched to an Italian document. The recipient is listed as a pharmaceutical company that was dissolved 3 years ago. Dante leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. The heat of him was distracting, pulling my focus from the screen to the way his breath stirred my hair. "What do you think it means?" he asked. "I think you're smuggling something. I think these documents are designed to fool customs officials and law enforcement. And I think you already know all of this and are testing whether I'm smart enough to figure it out." Silence stretched between us. Then, quietly, "You're right." I spun in my chair to face him. "About which part?" "All of it." He straightened, putting distance between us, and suddenly I could breathe again. "I needed to know if you'd lie to protect yourself, if you'd pretend ignorance to maintain deniability. And you didn't, which means you're either brave or foolish." His dark eyes assessed me. "I haven't decided which. Maybe both." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Finish the translations. You'll present findings tomorrow night." "Present to who?" "Business associates. Russians, mostly, but also representatives from the Italian families and one very nervous Chinese intermediary." He paused at the door. "Wear something nice. These men appreciate aesthetics." Heat flooded my cheeks. "I'm a translator, not decoration." "You're whatever I need you to be." The words should have been offensive, demeaning, but the way he said them flat, factual, stripped away everything except truth. "The car will pick you up at 7. Don't be late." He left before. I could argue. I stared at the closed door for a long moment, my heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. Then I returned to the documents, translating by the blue glow of the laptop screen until dawn crept through the high windows. The next evening, I stood in front of my closet and tried not to panic. "Wear something nice," he'd said, as if I had a wardrobe full of options suitable for meeting with organized crime figures. I owned exactly 2 dresses that weren't from a thrift store. One was black and practical, the kind you wore to funerals and job interviews. The other was dark blue with a fitted bodice and a skirt that fell to mid-thigh, purchased on impulse 2 years ago for a date that never happened. The blue dress it was. I paired it with the only heels I owned that didn't have scuff marks, applied makeup with shaking hands, and twisted my dark hair into a knot that looked intentionally messy, rather than desperately rushed. When I checked my reflection, I barely recognized myself. The knot came at exactly 7. The same young man from last night stood in the hallway. He looked me over once, quickly, then nodded as if I'd passed some invisible inspection. "Ready?" "No." "Yes." This time, the drive took us into the city proper, to a district where old money lived behind iron gates and security cameras. We stopped in front of a brownstone that looked historical, the kind with a plaque designating it a landmark. Inside was all dark wood and oil paintings, crystal chandeliers and the smell of expensive cigars. Men in suits filled a drawing room, their conversations stopping as I entered. Dante stood near the fireplace, and when his eyes found me, something in his expression shifted, darkened. He looked at me like I was both problem and solution, threat and treasure. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is Lucia. She'll be facilitating our discussion tonight." An older man with silver hair and a revless, cruel mouth spoke in rapid Russian. I translated without hesitation and watched surprise ripple through the room. For the next 2 hours, I became invisible and essential simultaneously. I moved between languages like breathing, catching every nuance, every veiled threat, every moment of tension. The men tested me repeatedly, switching mid-sentence, using obscure dialects, embedding insults in pleasantries. I caught everything, but it was during a heated exchange between Dante and the Chinese intermediary that I heard a single phrase in Mandarin that made my blood run cold. "The girl will be a problem. Kill her when the contracts are signed." My hands clenched in my lap. I didn't look at Dante, didn't let my expression change. But when I translated the man's words, I changed one crucial detail. He suggests maintaining current security protocols through the transition period, I said smoothly. Dante's eyes found mine across the room, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that he'd understood every word of Mandarin. He'd understood, and he was waiting to see if I'd tell the truth. I'd just lied to a room full of killers, and Dante Volkov knew it. The meeting ended an hour later with handshakes and promises that meant nothing and everything. The men filed out into the night, leaving behind the smell of cigars and tension so thick it felt like fog. I remained in my chair, hands folded in my lap, waiting. Dante dismissed his guards with a gesture. They left without question, and suddenly we were alone in the vast drawing room. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, rain had started again, tapping against the windows like fingers seeking entry. He poured 2 glasses of vodka, the expensive kind that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and crossed the room to hand me one. "Drink," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. I took the glass. The vodka burned going down, but it steadied my nerves. Dante settled into the chair across from me, his large frame, somehow graceful. He studied me in silence, and I forced myself to meet his gaze even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "You lied," he said finally. "Yes." "Why?" I took another sip of vodka, buying time. "Because he threatened me. Because I didn't think you'd appreciate an international incident during your business meeting. Because you were afraid," Dante interrupted. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "And you thought I wouldn't protect you. I don't know you. I don't know what you'd do. You know enough." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know I brought you here, that I paid you, that I put you in a room with some of the most dangerous men in this city and expected you to survive it. That doesn't mean you'd choose me over a business deal." Something flickered across his face, anger, maybe, or disappointment. "The Chinese intermediary is named Wei Chen. He works for the Zhao Syndicate out of Shanghai. He's been skimming money from joint operations for the past 6 months, and tonight's meeting was designed to catch him in a lie about territorial distribution." I blinked. "I don't understand." He failed the test. "The contracts we discussed don't exist. This was about loyalty, about seeing who would try to eliminate potential threats versus who would work within established parameters." Dante's eyes never left mine. "You translated everything accurately until that final comment. You made a choice in that moment to protect yourself by lying, or to trust that I would protect you if you told the truth." My stomach dropped. "So I failed." "No." He stood, moving to the fireplace, his back to me. The flames cast shadows across his broad shoulders. "You survived. That's different than failing." "Then why do I feel like I made a mistake?" "Because you did." He turned to face me, and the intensity in his expression stole my breath. "But not the one you think. Your mistake was assuming I'd let anyone in that room harm you. You can't know what they'd do. I own this city, Lucia." His voice dropped to something quiet and absolute. "I own the police, the ports, the politicians. Every shipment that moves through here, every deal that gets made, it flows through me or it doesn't flow at all. The Zhao Syndicate wants access to East Coast distribution. They need me far more than I need them. If Wei Chen had touched you, his entire organization would have paid for it." The certainty in his words should have frightened me. Instead, it sent a different kind of heat through my veins, dangerous and intoxicating. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do that?" Dante crossed the room in 3 strides. He stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that I could see the amber flecks in his dark eyes. "Because you're mine now," he said simply. "I don't let people damage what belongs to me. I don't belong to anyone. Don't you?" His hand came up, fingers catching my chin, tilting, my face toward the light. "You took my money. You sat in that room and translated words that could start wars. You lied to protect yourself because some part of you already knows the truth." "What truth?" "That you're already in too deep to walk away." He was right. God help me, he was right. I should have been terrified, should have run the moment his hand touched my face. But instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, drawn by the same magnetic pull that had captivated me in the restaurant. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you decide." His thumb brushed across my lower lip, a touch so light it might have been imagined. "You can leave. I'll pay you for tonight's work, and you'll never see me again. Your life goes back to normal, safe, predictable. small. Or you stay. You work for me, with me. You translate, yes, but also more. You become part of this world, with all its dangers and rewards. His hand dropped away, and I immediately missed the warmth of it. But, understand this, if you stay, you're all in. No half measures, no leaving when things get difficult. My mind screamed at me to choose safety, to take the money and run, to return to my quiet life of overdue rent and wasted degrees. But my heart, that reckless, hungry part of me that had spoken Greek when I should have stayed silent, whispered something else entirely. I'll stay, I heard myself say. Dante's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened with satisfaction. Then we have work to do. Wei Chen will report back to his superiors that the meeting went well. In 3 days, he'll attempt to have me killed during a supposed negotiation. We need to be ready. How do you know? Because it's what I would do. He moved to the bar, refreshing both our drinks. You'll attend the meeting as my translator. When the shooting starts, you'll do exactly as I say. Understand? When the shooting starts, I repeated faintly. You say that like it's inevitable. It is. He handed me the glass, and our fingers brushed. The contact sent electricity up my arm. Welcome to my world, Lucia. Try not to die in it. Then he smiled, truly smiled, and I realized I'd just agreed to walk into hell with a man who looked like the devil himself. And the most terrifying part was that I wanted to. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and proximity. Dante moved me out of my apartment, too exposed, he said, and into a penthouse in Midtown that had more square footage than my entire building back in Queens. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was modern and expensive. The closet in my bedroom contained clothes that hadn't been there before, all in my size, all perfectly suited to the role he expected me to play. I didn't ask how he knew my measurements. Each morning, a car arrived to take me to various locations, warehouses, offices, private clubs where I sat beside Dante, and translated conversations that ranged from mundane business to thinly veiled death threats. I learned the hierarchy of his organization, the web of alliances and enmities that kept the peace, the razor's edge he walked between power and destruction. But it was the evenings that undid me. After the meetings, after the guards were dismissed, and the business concluded, Dante and I would return to the penthouse. He'd pour drinks, always vodka for him, wine for me, and we'd review the day's intelligence. These debriefings should have been clinical, professional. They never were. You tensed when the Greek shipment was mentioned, Dante said on the second night. We sat on opposite ends of the leather sofa, the city glittering beyond the windows. Why? The numbers don't match the previous manifests. Someone's skimming. Who? Your man Alexei, the one with the scar. I took a sip of wine, gathering courage. He reported 30 containers, but the Greek contact referenced 32. The missing 2 weren't accounted for in any secondary documentation. Dante's jaw tightened. You're certain? Yes. He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly, then set it aside. Alexei will be handled. What else did you notice? And so it went, night after night. I'd point out inconsistencies, decode subtext, reveal the lies people thought they'd hidden. Dante listened to everything, those dark eyes never leaving my face, absorbing each word like ammunition. But somewhere between the business discussions and the careful way he refilled my glass without asking, something shifted between us. It happened in small moments, his hand at the small of my back as we entered a room, steady and warm. The way he angled his body to shield me when tensions rose during negotiations. How he'd started saying my name more often, as if testing the shape of it in his mouth. And the way I caught myself watching him when he wasn't looking, memorizing the line of his jaw, the way his hands moved with such controlled precision, the rare moments when his expression softened into something almost human. On the third night, everything changed. We'd returned to the penthouse after a particularly tense meeting with suppliers from Moscow. Dante was frustrated. I could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. They're going to betray you, I said quietly. The Petrov brothers. I heard them speaking before the meeting. They think you're distracted, that your attention is divided. Dante turned from the window where he'd been staring at the city. Distracted by what? By me. The admission hung in the air between us. Are they right? He asked. My heart stuttered. I don't know. Are you? He crossed the room slowly, deliberately. Each step felt like a countdown to something inevitable. When he stopped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, I forgot how to breathe. "Yes," he said simply. "I am distracted by the way you bite your lip when you're translating something difficult. By your voice, switching between languages like music. By the fact that you see things no one else sees, including things about me I thought I'd hidden." His hand came up, fingers threading through my hair. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, so at odds with the violence I knew he was capable of. "I shouldn't want this," he continued, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "You're my translator, my asset. Wanting you is a complication I can't afford." "Then don't want me," I said, but the words came out breathless, unconvincing. Too late. His thumb traced my cheekbone, and I shivered. "I've wanted you since you spoke Greek in my face, like you had nothing to fear. Since you sat in that meeting and lied to protect yourself because you didn't yet know I'd burn the world before I let anyone hurt you. Dante, tell me to stop." His forehead dropped to rest, against mine, and the intimacy of it nearly broke me. "Tell me you don't feel this too, and I'll walk away. I'll keep you safe, use your skills, and never touch you again." I should have told him to stop, should have maintained the professional distance that was the only thing keeping me sane in this insane world. Instead, I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. There was nothing soft or careful about the way his mouth claimed mine, the way his hands pulled me against him, the way I fisted my fingers in his shirt and held on like he was gravity and I was falling. He tasted like vodka and danger and something uniquely him, dark and addictive. The kiss deepened, turning desperate, months of tension compressed into a single moment of surrender. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were black with desire. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. The meeting tomorrow, it's going to be dangerous. More dangerous than anything you've seen. If you want out, tell me now." I thought about my old life, that safe, predictable existence that had felt like slow suffocation. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 days ago, invisible and forgotten, and I thought about the way Dante looked at me like I was powerful, essential, seen. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. He kissed me again, softer this time, like a promise or a prayer. "Then tomorrow," he said against my lips, "we end the threat, together." I spent that night in his arms, wrapped in expensive sheets, learning the landscape of scars that told stories he'd never spoken aloud. And when dawn came through those floor-to-ceiling windows, I understood that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I'd fallen for the monster. And God help me, I didn't want to climb back out. The warehouse on the edge of the harbor looked abandoned, rust-streaked walls, broken windows, the smell of salt and decay. But inside, Dante's men had transformed a section into something resembling a conference room. Folding table, metal chairs, harsh fluorescent lighting that turned everyone's skin pale and sickly. I sat beside Dante, my hands folded on the table to hide their trembling. He dressed me in black that morning: slacks, a silk blouse, flat shoes I could run in if necessary. His own suit was dark, tailored, with a shoulder holster visible when he moved. 8 men filed into the room. I recognized Wei Chen immediately, his expression carefully neutral. The Petrov brothers, Victor and Anatoly, looked smug, confident. The others were enforcers, muscle, men paid to follow orders without question. "Gentlemen," Dante said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Thank you for coming." Victor Petrov responded in Russian, something about efficiency and mutual benefit. I translated automatically, my mind splitting into 2 tracks, the professional translator performing her role, and the woman who'd spent last night in Dante's arms, hyper-aware of the gun on his hip and the tension coiling through his body. The negotiations began. Shipping routes, payment, schedules, territorial boundaries. Everything proceeded normally for exactly 17 minutes. Then Wei Chen's phone buzzed. It was subtle, just a quick glance at the screen, a slight nod, but I saw Dante's hand move incrementally closer to his weapon, saw the way his jaw tightened. "Mr. Chen has a question about the Panama routes," I said in English, though Chen hadn't spoken. "He wants to know why the costs increased by 30%. Dante's eyes flicked to me, understanding immediately. I'd just given him the signal something was wrong. Be ready. "The Panama routes," Dante started. The door exploded inward. 6 men in tactical gear poured through, automatic weapons raised. I didn't breathe. Dante's hand clamped on my wrist and yanked me down as bullets tore through the space where my head had been. The table flipped, becoming a barrier. The fluorescent lights shattered, plunging everything into strobing darkness punctuated by muzzle flashes. Dante returned, fire with cold precision, each shot finding its target. His men materialized from positions I hadn't known they occupied behind crates, in shadows, one dropping from the rafters like something from a nightmare. It was chaos and choreography, violence so practiced it looked like dance. Someone grabbed my ankle. I kicked hard, connected with flesh, heard a grunt of pain. Hands reached for me in the darkness, and then Dante was there, pulling me behind him, his body a wall between me and the gunfire. "Stay down," he growled. "The Petrovs," I gasped. "They're escaping." But Dante was already moving. He handed me a gun when he had time to grab a second weapon, and his eyes locked on mine for one crystalline second. "If anyone who isn't my man comes through that door," he said, "you shoot them. Understand?" I nodded, hands shaking around the unfamiliar weight of the weapon. Then he was gone, disappearing into the smoke and chaos. The gunfire intensified, moved away, became muffled by distance and walls. I crouched behind the overturned table, the gun raised, trying to remember everything I'd ever seen in movies about how to hold a weapon. Footsteps approached. I tightened my finger on the trigger, my heart a drum against my ribs. A figure emerged from the smoke, Wei Chen, his face bleeding, his expensive suit torn. He saw me and smiled, and there was nothing human in that expression. "The girl," he said in Mandarin. "The boss said to deliver you intact. He has questions." He moved toward me, and I did what Dante had told me to do. I pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke my wrist. The sound was impossibly loud, echoing in my skull. Wei Chen staggered backward, surprise blooming across his face, alongside the red stain spreading across his chest. He dropped. I stared at the gun in my hands, at the body on the floor, at the proof of what I'd just done. I'd killed someone. The thought kept repeating, looping, unable to find purchase in my mind. I'd killed someone. I'd ended a life. Lucia. Dante's voice cut through the shock. He appeared out of the smoke like something conjured, blood on his face, not his. I realized with dizzy relief, and his weapon still raised. He saw Wei Chen's body, saw the gun in my trembling hands. Then he pulled me to my feet and crushed me against his chest. "You're alive," he said into my hair. "You're alive. You followed orders. You're alive." I couldn't respond, couldn't form words. I just held on to him while my mind tried to process what had happened. Around us, the warehouse had gone quiet. Bodies littered the floor, some in tactical gear, some in suits. Dante's men were checking them systematically, ensuring none would rise again. "The Petrovs?" I managed. "Dead. Both of them." Dante pulled back enough to look at my face, his hands framing my cheeks. This was an attempted coup. Chen sold information to the Zhao Syndicate. The Petrovs saw an opportunity to seize territory. They planned to kill me and pin it on foreign actors. "How did you know?" "Because I'm not the trusting type." His thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't realized I'd shed. "And because you saw what I couldn't. Your warning gave me the seconds I needed." The full weight of it hit me then. If I hadn't noticed Chen's phone, hadn't given Dante that signal, he'd be dead. We'd both be dead. "I killed him," I whispered. "I know. I killed someone, Dante. I know." He kissed my forehead, gentle despite the violence still painted across his face. "And I'm sorry you had to. But you survived. We survived." Sirens wailed in the distance, his people, arriving to clean up the scene. Everything would be handled, sanitized, erased. By tomorrow, this warehouse would show no evidence of the war that had been waged in its belly. But I would remember. I would remember the weight of the gun, the sound it made, the way Wei Chen's eyes had widened in surprise. I would remember becoming someone new, someone who could kill to survive in Dante Volkov's world. And the most terrifying part was that I didn't regret it. They took me to a safe house. Not the penthouse compromised, one of Dante's men said, but a brownstone in Brooklyn that looked ordinary from the outside and was a fortress within. Steel-reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, security cameras covering every angle. I sat in the bathroom for an hour, scrubbing Wei Chen's blood from my hands. The water ran pink, then clear, but I kept washing, kept trying to erase the evidence of what I'd done. Dante found me there, my hands raw and red, soap suds up to my elbows. He turned off the water without speaking, dried my hands with a towel, led me to the bedroom and sat me on the edge of the bed. "Talk to me," he said. "I don't know what to say." My voice sounded strange, distant, belonging to someone else. "I killed him. I looked him in the eyes and I pulled the trigger and I watched him die." "Yes. That's it? Just yes? What do you want me to say?" Dante knelt in front of me, his large frame somehow making the gesture look natural rather than subservient. "That it gets easier? It doesn't. That you'll forget? You won't. That you had no choice?" He caught my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. "You had every choice, Lucia. You could have let him take you, could have frozen, could have died rather than taking a life. But I didn't. No, you survived." His thumb traced my jaw. "You did what needed to be done, and I'm sorry you had to, but I'm not sorry you're alive." Tears burned behind my eyes. "What does that make me? Strong?" He said it with such certainty that I almost believed him. "Adaptable, a survivor." A pause. Mine. That last word settled into my chest like an anchor. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. "This world, this life. I'm a translator, Dante. I was supposed to make travel brochures or work for the UN, not shoot people in warehouses. I know. Then let me go. Pay me what you owe me and let me disappear. I'll move to another city, change my name. No." The single word was absolute. "You don't get to decide." "Yes, I do." He stood, pulling me with him, his hands firm on my shoulders. "You think you can just walk away? Go back to your ordinary life and forget this happened?" "They saw you, Lucia. Chen's organization, the remnants of the Petrovs' network, anyone who had stake in today's coup attempt. They know you exist, know you're connected to me, know you killed Wei Chen." Horror flooded through me. "So I'm a target. You've been a target since the moment you spoke in that restaurant." His expression was hard, uncompromising. "The only difference now is that you've proven you can defend yourself, by becoming a killer, by refusing to be a victim." He pulled me closer, and despite everything, I didn't resist. "You want to hate yourself for what you did today. I understand that. But understand this in my world. Hesitation equals death. You acted on instinct, and that instinct saved your life. I won't apologize for being grateful for that. Even though it means I'm trapped here? Trapped with you? Yes. No hesitation, no softening of his features. Even though I should have been angry, should have fought, screamed, demanded my freedom. But standing there in his arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my cheek, I realized something terrible and true. I didn't want to leave. God help me. I wanted to stay. Not because I had no choice, but because some part of me had been waiting my whole life to feel this necessary, this seen, this alive. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we consolidate power. The coup attempt showed weakness in my organization traitors, gaps in security. I need to remind everyone why I'm in charge." His hand slid into my hair, tilting my face up. "And you need to decide if you can live with what you've become." "What have I become?" "Powerful." He kissed me then, and it was different from before, less desperate, more claiming, dangerous. Another kiss, deeper, mine. That word again, mine. Possessive and absolute, and somehow the only thing that made sense in this new reality I'd stumbled into. I kissed him back, pouring all my fear and confusion and desperate need into the connection. His hands tightened on me, and when we broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with something beyond desire. "Tell me you'll stay," he said. "Tell me you won't try to run." I thought about my old life, the safe, small existence I'd been so ready to escape. I thought about the woman who'd served drinks and dreamed of more. And I thought about the woman I'd become, the one who could translate death threats and pull triggers and survive in a world built on violence and power. "I'll stay," I whispered, "but not because I'm trapped." "Then why?" "Because when I'm with you, I don't feel invisible anymore." The truth tasted like blood and freedom on my tongue. "Because you see me really? See me and you're not afraid of what you find." Something shifted in his expression, softened. For just a moment, the ruthless Mafia boss disappeared, And I saw the man beneath, lonely, burdened, hungry for connection he'd denied himself for too long. "Lucia," he said, "my name a prayer and a curse. You have no idea what you've done to me. Then show me." He did. And somewhere between the darkness outside and the heat of his touch, I stopped mourning the person I'd been and started accepting the person I was becoming. Someone who could love a monster. Someone who might be becoming one herself. The war came 3 days later. Not with warnings or negotiations, but with fire and blood in the night. I woke to the sound of glass shattering. Dante was already moving, weapon in hand, his body coiled with lethal grace. He moved to the window, assessed the street below, and cursed in Russian. "How many?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Too many." He tossed me a vest bulletproof, heavy with promise. "Put this on. Stay low. Follow my exact instructions. Dante." No arguments. Not now. He pulled on his own vest, checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. "The Zhao Syndicate. They're calling in markers, uniting the smaller families against me. This is retaliation for Chen's death." The weight of that settled over me like a shroud. Because I killed him. Because he failed to kill me. Dante grabbed my face between his hands, forcing me to focus. "This isn't your fault. This was always coming. You just accelerated the timeline." Gunfire erupted from downstairs. Shouts in Mandarin and Russian and languages I couldn't immediately identify. The sound of Dante's guards returning fire, the heavy thud of bodies hitting floors. "We have 3 minutes before they breach this level," Dante said. "There's a safe room. I'm not hiding while you fight, Lucia. No." I grabbed the spare weapon he'd taught me to use over the past 3 days. "I'm not letting you die because you're trying to protect me. We survived this together or not at all." For one long moment, he stared at me. Then, impossibly, he smiled a flash of fierce pride that made my heart stutter. "Together," he agreed. The door exploded inward. What followed was nightmare and choreography. Dante moved like violence incarnate, each shot precise, each movement economical. I stayed at his back, covering angles he couldn't see, my fear transforming into cold focus. I'd never felt more alive. We fought our way through the house, collecting his surviving men only 5 of the original dozen. The losses showed on Dante's face, tightening his jaw, darkening his eyes. These weren't just employees to him. They were family, chosen and earned. We reached the garage. 3 armored vehicles waited, engines already running, contingency plans activated automatically when the attack began. "Move!" Dante shoved me toward the nearest vehicle. That's when I saw him, a man in tactical gear, emerging from behind a support column. His weapon was raised, aimed directly at Dante's back. I didn't think. I dove, throwing myself between Dante and the bullet. The impact was catastrophic. Pain exploded through my shoulder, white-hot and all-consuming. I felt my body hit the concrete, felt Dante catch me before I could crack my head, felt the warm spread of blood soaking through my clothes. "No." Dante's voice broke on the word. "No, Lucia. No." The tactical man crumpled one of Dante's guards had taken him out, but the damage was done. "Get her in the car," Dante roared. "Now!" Someone lifted me. The world tilted and blurred. I heard gunfire, heard screaming, heard Dante's voice giving orders in that cold, commanding tone that meant people would die tonight. The vehicle moved. Dante's hands pressed against my shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. His face was above mine, pale, terrified, an expression I'd never thought to see on him. "Stay with me," he commanded. "Lucia, look at me. Stay with me." "Dramatic," I managed. Blood filled my mouth. "You're being dramatic. Don't you dare die." His voice shook. "Don't you dare leave me." Not planning on it. The world was fading at the edges, darkness creeping in. I fought against it, clinging to consciousness with everything I had. "Why?" Dante's voice cracked. "Why did you do that?" "Because," I coughed, tasted copper. "Because you're mine too." His expression shattered. Then everything went black. Dante's point of view. She was dying in his arms, and Dante Volkov, who'd killed his first man at 15, who'd built an empire on blood and ruthlessness, who'd never feared anything in his entire life, was terrified. "Faster!" he roared at the driver. The private hospital was 12 minutes away. 12 minutes of watching Lucia's face go pale, feeling her blood soak through his clothes, listening to her breathing become shallow and irregular. He'd dealt with injuries before. Bullet wounds were common in his business. But this was different. This was Lucia, the woman who'd walked into his life with fire in her eyes and languages on her tongue, who'd seen the monster he was and chosen him anyway, the woman who'd just taken a bullet meant for him. "Don't you dare," he whispered against her hair. "Don't you dare be noble, Solnishko. I need you angry and alive and arguing with me. I need you." His voice broke. In 34 years, Dante had never needed anyone. Need was weakness. Need was vulnerability. Need got you killed. But Lucia had changed everything. She'd made him laugh, made him feel human, made him imagine a future beyond power and territory and endless war. And now she was dying because of him. "We're here," the driver announced. Dante was moving before the vehicle stopped, cradling Lucia against his chest, shouting for doctors. His personal physician, a man who knew better than to ask questions, appeared immediately. "Gunshot wound, upper left shoulder," Dante reported, his voice clinical despite the terror clawing at his throat. "Through and through, minimal bone damage, but she's lost significant blood. Get her to R1, the doctor ordered. They tried to take her from his arms. Dante held on. "Mr. Volkov," the doctor said gently, "we need to operate, now." Dante looked down at Lucia's pale face, at the blood that had already soaked through the pressure bandage. His hands were shaking. Dante Volkov's hands never shook. He laid her on the gurney with infinite care, like she was something precious and breakable. Because she was. She was. "Save her," he said to the doctor. It wasn't a request. "We'll do everything—" "No." Dante grabbed the man's wrist, his grip iron. "Save her. Whatever it takes. Whatever it costs. There is no option where she doesn't survive. Am I clear?" The doctor paled but nodded. They wheeled her away, and Dante stood in the hallway with blood drying on his hands, violence still singing in his veins, and fear real, gut-wrenching fear eating him alive. His phone buzzed. Updates from his men. The attack had been repelled. Casualties on both sides. The Zhao Syndicate's local operations would need to be destroyed completely. War, then. Total war. Dante made the calls with mechanical efficiency. Ordered strikes, authorized expenditures, set in motion the machinery that would erase his enemies from existence. But through it all, one thought repeated in his mind like a prayer. Let her live. Let her live. Let her live. Because if Lucia died, if he lost the only real thing he'd ever had, then Dante would burn the entire world to ash. And he'd start with himself. I woke to white walls and the smell of antiseptic. Pain radiated through my left shoulder, deep, throbbing, but manageable. An IV fed clear liquid into my arm. Monitors beeped steadily beside the bed, and Dante sat in a chair beside me, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He'd changed clothes, but dried blood still stained his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept, like he'd aged years in what my foggy mind suggested had been hours. "You look terrible," I said. My voice came out hoarse. His head snapped up. For one crystalline second, his carefully controlled expression shattered, revealing raw relief and something that looked dangerously close to anguish. "You're awake." He stood, crossed to the bed, his hand finding mine with desperate gentleness. "The doctors said they weren't sure you lost so much blood. I'm fine." I squeezed his fingers weakly. "Apparently I'm harder to kill than expected." "This isn't funny, Lucia." His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the fury beneath it. "You threw yourself in front of a bullet. You could have died. But I didn't. This time." He pulled away, pacing to the window, his shoulders rigid. "What happens next time? When you decide my life is worth more than yours, and you do something equally reckless? Would you prefer I'd let you die?" "Yes." He spun to face me, and the raw honesty in his expression stole my breath. "Yes, I would prefer that. My life for yours, that's a trade I'd make every single time." "That's not your choice to make, isn't it?" He crossed back to the bed, his hands gripping the railings. "I brought you into this world. I made you a target. Every danger you face exists because of me. I chose this," I said. "I chose you. Stop trying to take that away from me." "Why?" The word was torn from him. "Why choose this? Why choose me?" "Because you make me feel alive." I reached for his hand with my good arm, pulling him closer. Because you see me, really see me, and you're not afraid. Because when I'm with you, I stop being invisible. You were never invisible, Solnishko. The endearment little son fell from his lips like a confession. You were a goddamn supernova waiting to explode, and I was selfish enough to light the match. Then we're both selfish. I tugged him down until he sat on the edge of the bed. Because I don't want to go back. I don't want safe and invisible and small. I want this you, this life, even with all its danger. You almost died, but I didn't. We didn't. I touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. We survived, Dante. Together. Something in him broke. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against mine, and when he spoke, his voice was raw. I can't lose you, he whispered. I've lost everyone I've ever cared about, my parents, my brother, every person who got too close. I can't. His voice cracked. I can't survive losing you too. My heart clenched. Tell me, I said softly. Tell me what happened. For a long moment, I didn't think he would. Then, slowly, the story emerged. A family destroyed by rival factions when Dante was 16. His parents executed. His younger brother killed, trying to protect him. Dante, surviving through violence and cunning, building an empire on the ashes of his grief. Alone, always alone, until me. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to care for someone without turning them into a weakness. How to love without it becoming a weapon someone can use against me. You don't, I said. You just do it anyway. He pulled back enough to look at me, his dark eyes searching mine. What if I destroy you? What if you don't? I touched his jaw. What if we destroy each other and rebuild something better? A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. When did you become the brave one? When you showed me I could be. He kissed me then carefully, mindfully of my injury, but with an intensity that made my pulse race. When he pulled away, his expression had shifted into something determined. The Zhao Syndicate is finished, he said. I destroyed their operations last night. Completely. There's no one left to threaten you. Good. And I'm restructuring my organization, installing new security protocols. You'll never be that vulnerable again, Dante. Let me finish. His hand found my uninjured one, threading our fingers together. I'm also giving you a choice, a real one, without coercion or consequence. My heart stuttered. What kind of choice? Stay with me. Not as my translator or my asset, but as my partner, my equal. Share this empire I've built. Learn the business, make decisions, stand beside me instead of behind me. His thumb stroked across my knuckles. Or leave. I'll set you up with new identity, unlimited funds, protection that will follow you anywhere. You can start over, build the life you should have had. You'd let me go? I'd die inside. But yes. His jaw tightened, because loving you means giving you the choice I never had. Tears burned behind my eyes. You love me? Desperately, completely, in ways that terrify me. He raised my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles. I love you enough to let you go if that's what you need. I thought about safety, about starting over, about the ordinary life I'd once imagined. And I thought about this man damaged and dangerous and offering me his entire world. I choose you, I said. I choose this life, this darkness, all of it. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Relief crashed across his face. You're certain? Completely. I pulled him closer, ignoring the protest from my shoulder. I love you, Dante Volkov. Your darkness doesn't scare me. It matches my own. He kissed me again, deeper this time, a claiming and a promise and a surrender all at once. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. No more secrets, he said. No more protecting you from the truth. If you're in this, you're all in. Show me everything. It won't be easy. Good, I said. I was never interested in easy. His smile was fierce and full of dark promise. Then welcome to the Empire, Solnishko. Let's burn it all down and rebuild it together. And lying there in that hospital bed, my shoulders screaming and my heart soaring, I realized I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. I'd found my place, not in safety, but in chaos. Not in light, but in beautiful, terrible darkness. With the monster who'd become my salvation. 3 months later, I stood in the penthouse wearing a dress that cost more than my old apartment's yearly rent, looking out over a city that now felt like mine. Ours. The recovery had been brutal physical therapy for my shoulder, intensive training in everything from weapons handling to organizational hierarchy. Dante had kept his promise. He'd shown me everything. The legitimate businesses that fronted the empire, the shadow operations that kept money flowing, the delicate balance of alliances and threats that maintained peace. I'd absorbed it all like a language I'd been born to speak. Tonight was the first major meeting since my injury. Representatives from 7 families gathering to discuss territorial agreements and profit sharing. A show of unity, Dante had said. A demonstration of strength. And a test. "You're nervous," Dante said, appearing behind me. His hand settled on my shoulders. The injured one no longer made me flinch, and I leaned back against his chest. "I'm about to sit in a room with people who tried to kill us. Some of them, yes." His lips brushed my temple. "But they've learned there are consequences for that. Severe ones. The Zhao Syndicate's remnants had been systematically dismantled. Not quickly, that would have been mercy. Instead, Dante had taken apart their organization piece by piece, making an example that would be remembered for decades. I should have been horrified by the violence. Instead, I'd helped plan it. "Any last advice?" I asked. "Remember, you're not just my translator anymore. You're my partner, my equal. They need to see that." He turned me to face him, his dark eyes intense. "Don't defer to me. Don't hide your intelligence. You've earned your place at that table." "Through blood," I said softly. "Through strength." He caught my chin. "Through choosing to stand when you could have run. That means more than blood ever could." The car arrived 30 minutes later. This time, the meeting was held in one of Dante's legitimate properties, a private club in Midtown with Gilded Age architecture and security, sophisticated enough to detect weapons at molecular levels. No violence would occur here. This was neutral ground, sacred by unspoken agreement. We entered together, and I felt the weight of every gaze in the room. The families were represented by their leaders, men who'd built empires on violence and cunning. They assessed me with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Dante led me to the head of the table. Instead of sitting beside him, I took the chair at his right hand, the position of second in command. A statement. "Gentlemen," Dante said, "most of you know Lucia. For those who don't, she's not here as my translator. She's here as my partner. What she says carries the same weight as my words. Understood?" Silence. Then, slowly, nods around the table. The meeting began. It was 3 hours of negotiation, posturing, and carefully coded threats. But something had changed since the last gathering. The men at this table had seen what happened to those who challenged Dante. They'd watched the Zhao Syndicate's destruction, seen the fate of the Petrov brothers. They weren't allies, exactly. But they were cautious, respectful. And when I spoke offering alternative solutions to distribution conflicts, pointing out inefficiencies in proposed routes, translating subtext that others had missed, they listened. By the end of the meeting, I'd brokered 2 separate agreements and prevented what would have been a catastrophic misunderstanding between the Russian and Italian delegations. Dante's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once in approval. When the families finally departed, promises made and territories re-established, we remained in the empty conference room. "You were magnificent," Dante said. I was terrified. "You hid it perfectly." He pulled me into his arms. "You just sat at a table with 7 men who could order your death, and you commanded their respect. Do you understand what that means? That I'm committed to this insanity? That you're powerful." He kissed me softly. "That you're mine. That together, we're unstoppable." I wanted to protest that I wasn't his possession, but I understood what he meant. Not ownership, but belonging. The difference between being claimed and choosing to be claimed. "Take me home," I said. "Which one?" He smiled against my lips. "We have 4 safe houses, the penthouse, the estate upstate, anywhere you are." The penthouse was dark when we arrived, city lights spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dante poured drinks, vodka for him, wine for me, and we stood looking out over the empire we'd built together. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Bringing me into this? Every time you're in. Danger. Every time I see the scars you've earned because of me." His arm wrapped around my waist, "but I'm too selfish to wish you'd stayed away." "Good. Because I'm too stubborn to have listened if you'd told me to leave. I turned in his arms. This life, it's not what I imagined, but it's mine. Ours. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Not even safety? Safety is boring. I kissed him, tasting vodka and possession and home. I'd rather have you. He carried me to the bedroom, and in the darkness, we found each other again. Not with the desperate urgency of early days, but with the deep certainty of partnership. His hands knew my body now, every scar, every sensitive place, every way to make me gasp his name like a prayer. Afterwards, lying tangled in expensive sheets, his fingers tracing patterns on my spine, I felt something I'd never expected to find in this world of violence and darkness. Peace. I love you, Dante said into the silence. In case I forget to say it, tomorrow. You won't forget. I pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. You're too controlling for that. His laugh was low, genuine. True. I love you too, I said. My monster, my empire, my choice. Always, always. Outside, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, full of danger and opportunity and all the darkness that lived in the spaces between light. But here, in this moment, I was home. Not in safety, but in certainty. Not in innocence, but in power. I'd walked into Dante Volkov's world as a waitress with too many languages and too few options. I'd emerged as something else entirely, partner, equal, someone who could navigate darkness without losing herself. The girl I'd been would have been terrified of the woman I'd become. But the woman I'd become? She was exactly who I was meant to be, and she was done apologizing for it. Epilogue. 6 months later, the bistro where it all started burned to the ground. Accidental, the fire marshal's report said. Faulty wiring, but I knew better. Antonio had called me 3 days before, panic in his voice, saying men had been asking about me, dangerous men with questions and cash. So Dante had eliminated the problem. Not with violence that would have drawn attention, just a carefully timed electrical failure in a building that was probably overdue for demolition anyway. The insurance payout set Antonio up nicely in Florida, far from any danger. You're getting ruthless, I told Dante that night. I learned from the best. He pulled me onto his lap, and I pretended to resist for all of 3 seconds. Besides, that building held too many memories of when you were someone else's. I was never anyone's but my own. Keep telling yourself that, Solnishko. His lips found the curve of my neck. We both know the truth. I did. I was his, just as he was mine. We'd built an empire on ash and blood and languages whispered in the dark. We'd survived assassination attempts and betrayals and the weight of loving someone you'd kill for. And every morning, I woke up beside a monster and chose him all over again. Not because I had to, but because some people are meant for ordinary love and quiet lives. And some of us are meant for this beautiful, terrible, and forever. I chose this. I chose him. And I'd burn the world to keep it.